see in these children that they have heart rate increases but no heart rate variability. Interestingly, the chronic intermittent hypoxia also acts on this very network that I explained to you, this complex network. And what it does is it changes this balance that I told you is so important to maintain breathing. You have to have enough inhibition to breathe fast, but you can't have too much inhibition because then your breathing shuts down. So this balance is disturbed by intermittent hypoxia. And there's one important aspect of this, because this is a network, you need at least 500 nerve cells on each side of this network in order to maintain activity, breathing activity. So if you decrease activity in this network, then this whole network starts to fall apart and become very irregular. And what chronic intermittent hypoxia is doing, and we do this like, we expose these mice for 10 days, 20 days to intermittent hypoxia, now these neurons become much less excitable. So the same stimulus that causes strong excitation now causes much weaker excitation. So now what happens is, these neurons, because they are much weaker, now start to fail to synchronize to a breath. So in a normal condition, each inspiration leads to an inspiration, each synchronization of these neurons leads to an inspiration. But now you can see these neurons are much less excited, and you get these failures to synchronize. So instead of having a full breath, you have now a much weaker, and then a strong breath, and then again another weaker. So you get unreliable, incomplete synchronizations in this network. Because basically intermittent hypoxia has decreased the excitability of this network, and now inhibition becomes too strong. And so when you look at control slices, you can see they fluctuate in the amplitude by very little, but after intermittent hypoxia you get these dramatic fluctuations, and you get also fluctuation in the frequency. So you get irregularities in the frequency and the amplitude. And why is this important? This is important because during each breath you take, your prebuccal complex has to drive your tongue. And when you can see it, the anatomy, the tongue is huge. The tongue goes not only here, but it goes deep into your upper airways. And if you don't drive your tongue during each inspiration, you start to block your upper airways. And that's actually happening during snoring. Okay, so when you snore, your drive to the hypoglossus is weaker, and you start to swallow your tongue, it goes into the upper airway, you hear the sound, and it blocks the flow of air into the lungs. So now, when this network is weaker, it doesn't transmit now enough signals to the hypoglossus, so you get failure to drive the hypoglossus. So even though your breathing continues, now you don't drive your tongue, and this becomes a huge problem, and it becomes a huge problem because we're humans. Okay, so a pig doesn't have that problem, but a human has a problem because we developed speech, and in order to be able to speak, our pharynx is very collapsible. So we have a very collapsible pharynx. And if you now have a tongue that blocks your upper airway, you create a negative pressure, and then your pharynx collapses. So during each inspiration, you have to drive your hypoglossus, and if this doesn't happen, then you get negative pressure between the upper airways and your lung, and that causes your pharyngeal collapse and causes obstructive sleep apnea. But of course, if this network becomes too strongly inhibited by hypoxia, then you go into an apnea, and that is essential apnea. So you have basically these two states of the network where the network is disturbed and you get a hypoglossus apnea or a whole cessation of breathing. So now we understand these mechanisms, and again, the mechanisms that drive you in this obstructive sleep apnea is again oxidative stress. So in this network, basically after intermittent hypoxia, this network shows all the signs of oxidative stress, and we can block this oxidative stress. So this is a slice after chronic intermittent hypoxia, and now we expose the mice to the same kind of intermittent hypoxia, but we put scavenger for reactive oxygen species on, and now the network is totally normal. So basically this disturbance is not driven by hypoxia itself, but it's driven by the oxidative stress that is created by intermittent hypoxia. So this is just the same thing, it's just statistics. But what I showed you is that this central network that controls both your cardiorespiratory coupling, that controls your inspiration, that controls your upper airway, in intermittent hypoxia, it's driven by oxidative stress. And this oxidative stress dismantles this network. You fail to activate your tongue, you fail to activate your heart, and you fail to breathe properly. And that's the problem. So, how can we understand the detrimental effect of this, the chronic intermittent hypoxia, the bad side, and compare it to the good side that Gustavo told us? You know, what's the difference between a chronic sustained hypoxia and a chronic intermittent hypoxia? And in order to understand this, we have to actually go back to the Nobel Prize. Okay, so that's why this symposium is so important, because these three gentlemen here, in particular Greg Semanza, played a huge role in explaining this, because Greg discovered the HIF factor that activates all your other genes that are activated by hypoxia. So he discovered HIF-1 alpha, which is the pro-oxidant, okay? But really, understanding the pro-oxidant alone is not enough. What we need to understand is the balance between the pro-oxidant and the antioxidant, and that's when Naduri comes in. So what Naduri discovered was that in fact HIF-2 alpha is as important as HIF-1 alpha, because they form a balance, and that balance actually controls the reactive oxygen species. So HIF-2 alpha, the antioxidant, inhibits reactive oxygen species production, whereas HIF-1 alpha activates reactive oxygen species production. So when you go into chronic systemic hypoxia, like you live in La Paz, you have upregulated your pro-oxidant system, but you also have upregulated your HIF-2, and you don't suffer from reactive oxygen stress, and you can live perfectly normal, and you can run a soccer game, because your RS is balanced by these two gentlemen's discoveries. Okay? Now when you go into intermittent hypoxia, you also activate your HIF-1 alpha system, but you don't activate your antioxidant system. You don't have the time to build this up. And so you look at this network, you see you have a pro-oxidant state, but you have an oxidative state. So that's the major difference. So basically, you create an imbalance between HIF-1 alpha and HIF-2 alpha, which then is causing all the problems. So basically, when we think about what I just told you, is that we have a network that is intrinsically sensitive to hypoxia. In intermittent hypoxia, this network will be suffering from the production of reactive oxygen species, which is driving this discoupling, which is disturbing inspiration, which is causing obstructive sleep apnea. And this principle that I showed you in the case of intermittent hypoxia is a fundamental principle for other problems that we have. For example, we have Venkatesh here, who studies the effect of lead, and lead actually also increases your reactive oxygen species. It's also blocking antioxidant activity, and so we know that people that suffer from lead poisoning also suffer from lower heart rate variability, because again, you create ROS. And of course, if you're in high altitude in a mine that does mining of these heavy metals, you actually are even more prone to a reactive oxygen stress. Then we have infections, so inflammation also creates reactive oxygen stress and also affects this. And then you have then also air pollutants that are also creating reactive oxygen species. So all of this acts on this, on these effects, and then cause cardiovascular problems, and they cause oxidative stress, and they also cause sudden death in a lot of these people. I just want to give you one last example of why this becomes clinically important. So this is a recording from our hospital here, and what you see is the heart rate variability of one child that is critically ill because it had an infection, it suffers from sepsis. So what you see here is that's when the cardiac arrest happened, and that's when the child died. Okay? So you have the situation, here is the cardiac arrest, and here's the child expired. But you can see that the heart rate variability went down way before you had a cardiac arrest. Okay? So this is like 18 hours, and that's 6 o'clock in the morning. So you had 6 hours or 12 hours of warning that something will happen because this network started to uncouple because probably you had reactive oxygen stress. So understanding this connection will help us basically to prevent this, because maybe we could have put antioxidants here and prevented a lot of this. And that's why understanding these mechanisms will be very important. Okay? So with this, I want to thank the people. I really have an amazing group of people that study, in vivo. They know about oxidative stress. They know they are mathematicians partly to study this respiratory coupling. I have wonderful collaborations with David Wiesmeyer, who is a clinician, and then a 10-year or 15-year long collaboration with Nanduri, who is looking at the same aspects, not at the central nervous system, but at the peripheral nervous system, because he wants to understand how intermittent hypoxia affects the carotid body. And whatever I told you about the central nervous system is also happening in the carotid body, and the interaction between the carotid body and the central nervous system then together causes all the effects that I just told you. But the principles came from Nanduri. So thank you very much for your attention. And this is our center here.
So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, so we will wait for the panel discussion for all these questions.
Exactly. Yes.